Do calories matter? Yes. Yes, calories do matter. Is fat loss based on calories in versus calories out? Or better put, does fat loss depend on simply eating less than you expend on a daily basis? Whether that is through uh, effectively restricting your food or increasing your energy expenditure? Well, yes and no. Yes, insofar as in order to lose fat, you do need to create a calorie deficit. Now, I know some people are going to dispute me on this and say that they've gotten lean and dropped body fat whilst being on maintenance calories or even when bulking or eating in a caloric surplus. And this can happen sometimes, but even here, they're still only going to be losing fat at the specific times of the day when they're in a calorie deficit, aka in this case between meals. So even though they're not in a calorie deficit all the time, as in across the entire week potentially, there will be times of the day that they're in a calorie deficit because they're not eating all day. Uh, so you do need a calorie deficit in some way or another in order to lose the body fat that you're going to want to lose. Now, what I just mentioned about being in a deficit for some of the day and a surplus through other times of the day, um, this is a good strategy for body recomposition gains when you're trying to both lose fat and gain muscle at the same time, because what you're essentially trying to do is create an environment where you're losing body fat when in the times that you're not eating, and gaining muscle and minimizing fat storage in the times that you're eating. And I have used this with some of my clients before, but doing it properly is really tricky, and very few people can actually do it because you need to be really, really on it. For most of us, chasing one goal at a time is a lot easier and it leads to better results, and it's more measurable. But calories in, calories out, although it's very real and we need to pay attention to it, it's not the only condition that needs to be met in order to lose fat properly and in a healthy way. So what I'm going to talk about right now is the common traps, which I don't want you to fall prey to. The first big mistake is assuming that a calorie deficit is a stringent thing and something that we can inherently measure. We can measure it to an extent, but let me show you what I mean. If you're a man who burns 2,500 calories on a daily basis, then cutting your intake down to 1,500 calories will leave you in a 1,000 calorie deficit, which is great, right? 1,000 calories lost per day means, or extra burnt per day means 7,000 over the course of the week, and there's so to every pound of fat we're looking at about 3,500 calories. So with by that logic, you'd be losing 2 pounds a week. But the danger is assuming that 1,000 calorie deficit will always be a 1,000 calorie deficit, which it won't be. Because if it was, and you did lose 2 pounds a week consistently for the rest of your life, then by a couple of years' time, your weight would have decreased to less than nothing. And it doesn't happen like this. What will happen is that your body will compensate. And this is what I call backing yourself into a corner. You may have originally had a 1,000 calorie deficit by eating 1,500 calories and burning 2,500 calories throughout your day, but in time, your body's metabolism will downregulate, and you may now only be burning about 800 calories per day, and so on. It slows even more, and now we're down to you're burning off an extra 600 calories a day, and so on and so on, and this will keep happening. Your thyroid output just gets slower and slower until, fat loss stops and you've plateaued. Now when this happens, what do you do then? You're in a corner. You backed yourself into a corner, and the only thing you can do is either stay still, so stay eating very little and uncomfortably small amounts of food, and not lose any more weight, or you can increase the calories again and be subject to rebound weight gain. None of which are ideal. So, firstly, a smarter and more gentle calorie deficit is, in my opinion, needed when we're looking at weight loss. You also need to understand that fat loss isn't linear. It doesn't happen in a straight line and consistently. Sometimes it's slower and sometimes it's faster. And we've got to invoke weight loss without doing anything too bold or too drastic, and so that you can achieve successes over the long term, not just the short term. And there are various ways we could do this. Essentially, what I'm getting at is that calories do matter, but your body is not a calculator. And although you may see the numbers, you may think about the numbers, be reading food labels, your body doesn't think about that at all. Your body doesn't care. It knows what it recognizes. Okay, so the second thing is the false assumption that 1,000 calories of this is the same as 1,000 calories of that, and that fat loss will be the same irrespective. I can tell you now, it won't. Your body processes 1,000 calories of chicken breast very differently to 1,000 calories of Coca-Cola, and very differently to 1,000 calories of butter. The time of day we eat relative to what we're doing also makes a profound difference, especially in how our nutrients are partitioned. And what I mean by that is, let's say you're eating a meal at 1 o'clock, how much is going to be used for immediate energy, how much is going to be used for synthesizing protein, how much is going to be used to essentially putting on more body fat. These are things to consider. So the duration of gaps between your meals will have an effect on this. And if you let your body go too long without food, your body will need to increase levels of cortisol to maintain your blood sugar and stop your blood sugar from dropping too low. And this is a burden on the adrenal glands and might create an environment where it's more difficult to lose fat. So what this means is that, if I give you an example, let's say your daily allowance for calories is about 2,000 calories. Well, what I wouldn't recommend is not eating all day, then eating one 500 calorie meal at 7 o'clock in the evening, and then another 1,500 calorie meal 2 hours later. I wouldn't expect that to work, as well as 3 meals of roughly equal size split at equal points throughout the day, which are a little bit more spread out. So I'm not dead set against some meals being bigger than others, or slightly longer periods without eating. But really, really long periods of eating followed by massive intakes of food, without any structure with regard to how much protein, how much carbohydrate, how much fat, that's just something I wouldn't recommend, and I don't think it would particularly lead to the best results. So what to do? I'll leave you with a few things. 1, spread your meals out throughout the day. You don't need to eat 6 meals to stoke the metabolic fire, like you hear the old school bodybuilding advice. That's not necessary, but you just need to make sure that you control your blood sugar and you don't let your body go into hypoglycemia, which is where your blood sugar drops too low. Also, eating more frequently will 1, reduce the burden off the digestive system because it doesn't need to process huge amounts of food at once, and 2, it will control your output of insulin. Insulin is a storage hormone, and it increases on a dose-dependent manner depending on how much food and carbohydrates you eat. So smaller, more frequent feedings of food will lead to a more controlled release of insulin. 2, make sure you're eating enough protein, animal protein included. 3, make sure you're eating enough vegetables. This is actually one that very few people are doing correctly. I can say with some certainty that 95% of you watching will need more vegetables in your diet. Number 4, do some exercise a few times a week to at least moderate intensity. So, you need to exercise hard enough to invoke change, but not so hard that you push your body over the edge. And 5, sleep well. If you don't sleep, you don't recover, and your body may be pushed into a state of alarm, making it difficult to gain muscle or burn fat. So those are 5 very basic principles, but you know what, basics is all that's needed most of the time. So feel free to re-watch this video, stick to the 5 principles and keep things simple.